Ah, nous sommes au Parlement européen, le cœur de la démocratie, nous dit-on. Le cœur de la démocratie. Mais vraiment, puisque c'est tout près d'ici, à la Commission, que se sont décidés les contrats Pfizer. Les contrats Pfizer dont les documents, les tests ont dû être rendus publics sur décision du juge, malgré la Food and Drug Administration qui ne le voulait pas. Et ces contrats, 450 000 pages, ont été analysés par Naomi Wolf, journaliste américaine, très connue, qui depuis a été censurée, bannie, et a été reçue uniquement dans l'émission de Bannon aux États-Unis. Voilà, donc Pfizer Papers, on est ici et Naomi Wolf est invitée par Christine Anderson, députée européenne, la seule, quasiment la seule qui l'invite. Et donc ça va commencer, donc suivez, ça sera qu'en anglais, on le retransmettra après avec les traductions français, mais pour l'instant nous n'avons que l'anglais. Voilà, suivez-nous. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Freedom of information.
That I mentioned?
You know the name? Someone requested the freedom to get the Pfizer Papers.
Oh, that was Aaron Siri. But it wasn't a Freedom of Information Act. It was a lawsuit against the FDA.
Yeah, because they refused to give it.
Who's they?
Pfizer, or the FDA rather.
I don't know how the lawsuit began, but
Okay,
it was against the
I'll
FDA.
keep it obscure.
But it was definitely a lawsuit and not a FOIA.
Okay. They denied it. And then
What they
FDA
did is that
the FDA,
the FDA wanted
to have it sealed for 75. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. But I think the initial
I don't know a status of any
Yeah.
FOIA, so I don't have to source behind that.
All right. All right. ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming. I think it is a very important evening tonight because here it is. This is what I call the smoking gun. In this documentation, it becomes quite clear, and Naomi will then, of course, elaborate on that. Pfizer lied, and so did our governments. And how did it all start? It started pretty much out by something called the Freedom of Information Act, and requiring Pfizer, respectively the FDA, the Federal Drug Association, or
Food and Drug Administration.
Food and Drug Administration of the United States, to release these Pfizer papers, and but Pfizer, respectively FDA, then not wanting to do that, petitioned a court, and they wanted the judge to allow the FDA to keep the papers under wraps for 75 years. Interestingly enough, though, there has been talk in Germany this April, the so-called Freedom of Information Act, so any citizen can ask the government for information, and there was a discussion about abolishing that right for the citizens altogether. Now that's a big tell. So they no longer want the citizens to even know what the government should be publishing. But that is just a side note. So anyhow, the FDA wanted the Pfizer papers to be locked up for 75 years, which the judge didn't go with. Then the FDA offered, well, then, we would be prepared to publish 500 pages per month, which in essence would have taken 75 years to get all of the paper out, because it was in total roughly 450,000 pages. Well, the judge didn't want to have any of that, and he ordered the FDA, they would have to release 55,000 pages per month. And there was over a period of, I think, like 1 year or 1.5 years, and then it was all there. And then our very honorable guest tonight, Dr. Naomi Wolf, your concern was that it would just be lost in history, as you said earlier, because there is no way that layman can sift through 450,000 pages of highly technical information. So what Naomi managed to do was to gather, how many? 2,000, 3,000?
3,500.
3,500 volunteers globally sifting through that information and putting all of the information together for everyone to see and everyone to read. Like I said, it is the smoking gun. We have the information. And I just remember today, and I actually looked it up, it was on July 25th of 2022. I made a public comment in an event like this, and I will read to you what I said 3 years ago. This mRNA campaign will go down in history as the biggest medical scandal ever. And moreover, it will go down as the biggest crime committed against humanity. Back then, anyone could have known if he wanted to know. All you had to do was go through the adverse event reports in the United States, and you would have found out that within the first 7 months of the rollout of the mRNA injection, there were 20 times more serious adverse effects, and there were 23 times more deaths reported than of all of the other vaccines combined ever since they have been rolled out in the 70s. I repeat, 7 months of mRNA injections, 20 times more serious side effects, and 23 times more deaths reported than all of the other vaccines combined in a period of 30 years. This is the lie that people have been literally pushed down their throats. They have been threatened. They have been ostracized. They have been criminalized. I mean, you name it. That went on. So it was particularly interesting that I made this comment 3 years ago, and I read it in your book. In the very first pages, Naomi, you said the very same thing. And yeah, I stand by that comment, and I will be repeating it for times to come. So anyway, but you didn't come here to listen to my boring remarks here. I'm pretty much sure you came all to see and hear and listen to Dr. Naomi Campbell. Campbell.
Thank you.
Can you
I'll take
imagine?
it.
Great, isn't it great? Dr. Naomi Wolf, of course. And I really have to thank you. You put in a lot of work. I mean, just flipping through the pages, it is so much information. But to compile it and put it together for laymen to understand and read, to really understand the massive lie that we have been subjected to. And I would very much like you to join me in welcoming the great Naomi Wolf. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Can you hear me loud and clear if I sit this distance? Wonderful. Well, thank you, MEP Anderson. Thank you to your so hospitable staff who has welcomed me and my husband, Brian O'Shea, to Brussels. And thank you all for taking time from your incredibly important work to sit with us here. Thank you to those watching online. I just want to say before I begin that it's extremely moving to me to be sitting in this place, in the heart of Europe, and meeting so many people from different political perspectives, certainly different from mine in many ways. I consider myself a classical liberal. My whole life I've been a Democrat. I advised the Clinton team in their re-election and Vice President Gore in his election campaign, but that really doesn't matter. You know, whether I share every policy position, I'm in agreement with Ms. Anderson, MEP Anderson, or with other MEPs whom I've met here, their colleagues from whatever political party, because what's happening right now in Europe and the United States and worldwide is an extraordinary historical moment. It's related to what I'm going to tell you, but all over the world, people are realizing that what divides us in policy terms or political labels is not nearly as important as our fundamental core values as Europeans, as North Americans, people around the world who love freedom and individual human rights, the rule of law, and that's what was targeted ultimately by these injections as it's being targeted in other ways. And I will explain that, but fundamentally, whatever the political party is of people I'm meeting here, we are brothers and sisters, we are allies, because first of all, we need to save European democracy, we're saving American democracy, we need to save democracies, rule of law, and free speech around the world. So I just want to say that before we begin. Shall I launch right in? All right, so some of you may know who I am. I've been a public figure since I was 26 years old, and others may not. I'm a long-standing best-selling feminist author. I've written 9 best-selling books, translated in European languages of many kinds, and I was a Rhodes Scholar. I got a DPhil at Oxford University in English literature. I'm not a medical doctor. But I am a journalist. I've appeared in every major news site. I was a columnist for The Guardian and for the Sunday Times of London and so on. But all of that didn't matter in June of 2021 when I posted a tweet that is the kind of thing I've covered in many best-selling books, which covered women's reproductive health. When I noted that women were reporting eyewitness accounts of their bodies, which is, as a feminist, you're supposed to be allowed to listen to women about their bodies. They were reporting eyewitness accounts of menstrual damage upon having received the mRNA injection. And literally that was my post. And overnight, I was canceled from X, Twitter at that time, canceled from Facebook, YouTube. My bio changed around the world simultaneously, which is interesting. I didn't think AI had rolled out then, but something did that. Went from, Rhodes Scholar, doctorate at Oxford, to conspiracy theorist. And overnight, every major news outlet that had published me and featured me for 40 years closed their doors to me, and I was literally voiceless. So that doesn't really matter what happened to me personally, except that a warning signal that women around the world were entitled to have received about their own bodies and reproductive health was intentionally silenced. And I found out later, during lawsuits brought by the state's attorneys general of the state of Missouri and of Louisiana, that it was people for whom I had voted, the Biden administration, notably senior people at the CDC, the Census Bureau, which knows where I live, who I'm related to, other agencies, including law enforcement agencies, that had colluded to put pressure on Twitter and Facebook and other social media sites to silence my tweet and to discredit me. And that was very terrifying, to find out the most powerful government in the world had singled you out. And by the way, we have a First Amendment in the United States, thank God. And two courts now have found that two settlements have found that my constitutional First Amendment rights were violated, and that the Biden administration had no legal right to silence a citizen, but that happened. So as a journalist, I realized that there must be a story here, because why go to so much trouble to suppress this simple tweet of mine? And in 2022, as you described, the successful lawsuit by attorney Aaron Siri led to the forced release of 450,000 documents from Pfizer in the custody of our FDA. Now, I was only being hosted at that time by Steve Bannon, the far right-wing commentator. Another example of, I don't agree with Bannon on a lot of issues. I'm still a liberal, but he cared about what was happening to women and children. So I was talking on his show about these issues, and he said, these documents will be lost to history. Of course, you're going to convene a group of experts to go through them. And I said on the air, of course I am, not having any experience in doing that. But miraculously, 3,500 doctors and scientists did convene and worked for 2.5 years pro bono in service of humanity, but also out of love for science and medicine, to read through these massive documents, technical documents, and to issue what are now 105 reports. 50 of them are in that book, if you would kindly hold it up at some point. And we published them in real time. Now, before I tell you what's in the Pfizer documents, I just want to note that it's been 2.5 years since we began publishing these reports, and we have not received a lawyer's letter from Pfizer. So what is reported is accurate. No one from Pfizer is telling us to cease and desist. It's accurate. And also, it's not my opinion. I just want to stress that. I'm not the author of this book. I'm an editor of it. Amy Kelly is the leader of the effort, my COO. But what's in this book are reports that link directly to the primary documents. So if you have any doubt about any conclusion in any of these reports, you can link, you can check the Pfizer documents and see for yourself what that primary document looks like. All right, so what's in the Pfizer documents? First of all, and I think this is very important for you as MEPs, Pfizer knew a month into the rollout into the public of this injection, so November of 2020, that this vaccine did not work to stop COVID. And I want you to process that and absorb that. It means that everything that followed. The mandates, the lost jobs, the businesses that had to close, the children not allowed to go back to school or university if they didn't take the shot, right? The armed forces compelled to take the shot, the pilots compelled. All of that followed, the two-tier society, the suppression of liberties, was predicated on a lie. It didn't stop COVID, concluded Pfizer, the end of 2020. In fact, in Pfizer's words, their phrasing was failure of efficacy and vaccine failure. And indeed, the most common side effect in the Pfizer documents is COVID. The most common side effect of getting vaccinated is COVID. So everything that followed was a lie. Second, they knew that the injection did not stay in your deltoid. I'm sure that Europeans, probably through the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, like our FDA, or other public health entities, told people here, if you have side effects, it's likely to be chills, fever, a little fatigue, you may need to lie down. No, Pfizer knew that and they said that the materials stay in the injection site. They knew that was a lie. In fact, in the Pfizer documents, there are charts showing that the materials, the spike protein, the mRNA, the lipid nanoparticles, which is a petroleum byproduct, rather polyethylene glycol, a petroleum byproduct surrounding lipid nanoparticles, an industrial fat, they didn't stay in the deltoid. They biodistribute within 48 hours, and they leave the injection site and biodistribute to major organs throughout the body. They cross the blood-brain barrier. You may have noticed personality changes in some of your loved ones who took this injection. But they also accumulate in the liver, the adrenals, the spleen, the lymphatic system, and if you're a woman, they accumulate in your ovaries. And so this is an industrial fat accumulating in women's ovaries, right? So the first injection accumulates in your ovaries. The second injection, more accumulates in your ovaries. Our experts could not find any mechanism whereby this material left the body, male or female. So by the first booster, people are already reporting when they do surgery on vaccinated women that they're fully blocked ovaries, okay, as well as other kinds of damage. Pfizer knew that. Pfizer knew that they had to hire 2,400 full-time staff in order to process the reports of serious adverse events they were already starting to receive. And indeed, within the Pfizer documents, it's a 3-month period of time, end of 2020, November of 2020, to February of 2021. Well, that tallied up over 42,000 serious adverse events. Many individuals had multiple serious adverse events, and just an overwhelming number of side effects that were not fever and chills, but in fact, things you were not told about. So the number one side effect in the Pfizer documents is something called myalgia, which is muscle pain. How many people do you know who just feel bad? Well, Pfizer knew they would feel bad. Doctors are baffled, myalgia. The second most common side effect is joint pain, because these injections are inflammatory. And Pfizer knew that. What is arthritis? What is joint pain? Tendon pain, it's inflammatory. How many people do you know who are limping or had to have knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder replacements? Young, healthy people, many of them. Pfizer knew. The third most common side effect, as I mentioned, is COVID. But after that, there is a catastrophic industrial scale tallying of horrifically serious side effects, notably heart damage, myocarditis, pericarditis, problems with the aortas, a great deal of blood damage, thrombotic thrombocytopenia, blood clots, lung clots, leg clots. These lipid nanoparticles create clotting in the body. Everyone knew that about lipid nanoparticles before this mRNA who worked with them. Florid neurological events. Our experts found that the lipid nanoparticles strip the myelin sheath from nerves, which is how electricity is conducted in a nerve impulse. So, of course, you're getting tremors. How many people do you know who now have tremors? You're getting Guillain-Barré. You're getting dementias, epilepsy-type seizures, horrific neurological events, and also autoimmune disorders of all kinds, lupus-type disorders, because now we know these injections damage the immune system. Also, things that would surprise you, a huge amount of eye damage, blindness, eye damage of all kinds. And in addition to all of these side effects, miscarriages, I'll get into the reproductive damage, 1,200 deaths in 3 months. And these are not statistically random people who happen to have died. They were old, they had prior conditions. 1,200 deaths that doctors let Pfizer or the authorities know needed to be recorded because there was some causality they were concerned about. Other smoking guns, you call this the smoking gun. 2 of our reports show, in my view, causality. Half of the liver and the stroke serious adverse events took place 48 hours after the injection, including deaths. Pfizer knew this. Okay. Pfizer knew by April of 2021 that minors were being injured by this vaccine, specifically myocarditis and pericarditis, heart damage. Never before have we had healthy young people dropping dead on playing fields, right? Never. It almost never happened. Now it is so common. But what Pfizer knew was that 35 minors had sustained heart damage. Indeed, one of the most scandalous things that our work has surfaced is that the FDA knew, the CDC knew, Dr. Walensky knew by April of 2021. The Israeli Ministry of Health was trying to tell the CDC and the Biden administration that minors were having their hearts damaged. And instead of, we FOIA'd, we did a Freedom of Information Act request for the Biden records at that time, mentioning myocarditis, and we found that there was active conversation, including to POTUS, right, surfacing all the way up potentially to the White House. 15 White House staffers, Dr. Walensky, Dr. Fauci, the head of HHS, all on these communications where they were talking about myocarditis in minors following the shot, but instead of saying, we have to pull this, we have to tell the parents of America, and by extension the world, that they must save their children and young adults from this risk, they were deciding how to spin a cover-up. And they issued a 17-page document that even after the FOIA is completely redacted, which was a script that they used to spend the next 3 months of summer telling parents to get their minors injected. And indeed a big influencer TikTok campaign encouraging young adults and minors to get injected. And they knew that kids would sustain what is often deadly heart damage from these injections. They knew, and in fact, Senator Ron Johnson, now under this administration, is using our work to unredact those documents and to shine a light on that cover-up. He had hearings about it. Pfizer knew all of these things, but in some ways, all these side effects, all this damage isn't the most shocking, surprising thing in the Pfizer documents, and I'll tell you what is. You know, COVID is a respiratory infection. So you would expect a lot of information in Pfizer documents about lungs, about oxygen levels, about mucous membranes. No, there's almost nothing about respiratory issues in the Pfizer documents. What there is a 360-degree obsessive focus on ruining human reproduction, ruining male fertility and ruining female fertility, ruining sperm, ruining fallopian tubes, ruining ova, ruining placentas, ruining fetuses in utero, ruining the birth process, ruining lactation. That's what they were studying. That's what they were focused on. Why is that? Why did they take male and female rats, male vaccinated, female unvaccinated, mate them, sacrifice the rats, and examine the cells of their sex organs for a respiratory infection? Why is that? overwhelmingly the focus is on ruining human reproduction. So let me just give you some examples. They knew, as I mentioned, that it blocks the ovaries, which could contribute to the menstrual damage that I mentioned. But they also knew, as I mentioned, that the lipid nanoparticles, which are designed to cross every membrane in the body, what is a membrane? The placenta is a membrane. The lipid nanoparticles traverse the placenta of pregnant women who were told in my country to get this injection during their pregnancies, violating decades of knowledge about how to not hurt babies in utero, right? You don't give the pregnant woman anything. But women were told to inject this, traverses the placenta, it causes calcifications in the placenta, which prevent the baby from getting nutrients and oxygen. And in fact, in my country, midwives independently are reporting to me, leaking to me as a journalist. When you have multiple independent reports, there's a story there that babies are being born early because the placentas cannot grow normally. And people are nodding. They're seeing the same thing, no doubt, in Europe, or there are reports of it. The placentas are flat. They send me pictures, not normal, supplied with blood and oxygen. And so babies have to be delivered early. So standard. Well, it's not that easy to deliver a baby from a mother whose placenta has been impaired. Placentas are falling apart in the delivery process. What does that mean? It means women are hemorrhaging during childbirth or retaining part of the placenta, which is so dangerous. And so maternal fetal mortality, women dying in childbirth in the West, which had largely solved this deadly problem of the past in other parts of the world, is up by 40% since the injections. Pfizer knew. Pfizer knew that the lipid nanoparticles would go into the baby, and again, what's a membrane? They knew that the lipid nanoparticles would traverse the membrane around the testes of baby boys in utero, thus degrading the Leydig cells and Sertoli cells of baby boys of vaccinated moms. Even if the babies are not vaccinated, they're getting this from their moms. So what does that do? Sertoli cells and Leydig cells are the factories of masculinity. Hormones, they switch on the hormones of masculinity at adolescence, triggering what we think of as a traditional adult male development, deep voices, broad shoulders, body hair, facial hair, and as an adult, the ability to father a child successfully. Well, we don't even know if these baby boys in utero at adolescence will grow into normal, fertile adult males, even if they're never vaccinated with this mRNA injection. But Pfizer knew they were damaging the testes of baby boys in utero. They knew they were damaging sperm. An andrology report confirmed that the injection kills the abundance and motility of sperm in men. And to this day, and this is a job for you all, I believe, to this day, there's something Pfizer knows about dangers to women in vaccinated men's sperm that they're not disclosing. In the Pfizer documents, there's a warning to men who are subjects of the study not to have intercourse if they were vaccinated with unvaccinated women of childbearing age, and if they did, to use 2 reliable forms of contraception. 2, Pfizer defines exposure to the vaccine as including, right, shedding is supposed to be a conspiracy theory, as including skin contact, breath, and body fluids, such as semen. And to this day, we don't know what that is, right? We know that women anecdotally are having horrible cramps, real problems with when they have intercourse with vaccinated husbands. We don't know why Pfizer said don't do that. I can tell you one hypothetical a little further on. They told women in the study not to get pregnant. Nonetheless, 270 women got pregnant in the study, vaccinated women. Now, 234 of them, the records of what happened to that pregnancy were lost, which is illegal. Pfizer is supposed to follow them through pregnancy. However, of the 36 women who gave birth, over 80% of them lost their babies. Over 80%. Pfizer knew that. One of the most chilling things in the Pfizer papers is something called a pregnancy and lactation report. And I'm feeling like the heaviness in the room, and I empathize. You know, this is very dark news, but I also want to say there's a lot that can be done, and you all are in a beautiful position to do it. So please bear with me for the rest of this darkness, because, you know, this is very serious, but there are ways to engage with this information after you have it constructively. The pregnancy and lactation report is an 8-page document that was prepared specifically for the White House and given to Dr. Walensky, to the FDA, to the White House in April of 2021. Now, I am the daughter I'm the daughter and granddaughter of immigrants, but I'm the granddaughter of 2 people who lost 8 siblings in the Holocaust. And that's why I'm sitting here with you today, because if that wasn't part of our family's history, I wouldn't understand so clearly the importance of raising these warnings and calling attention to these atrocities. I've written about, and I know it's illegal in Germany, too bad. I'm going to use my American free speech. I'm in a free place. I've studied deeply the history of Nazi medicine. As a result, when I saw the pregnancy and lactation report as a Jew and as the granddaughter of people, part of whose family were wiped out by them, this was a very chilling and recognizable document. It had charts, very scientific, neutral, careful charts. And if you're, even superficial students of history, you know why I stress that. These careful charts show horrific damage to women and babies in the pregnancy and lactation report. There is a chart showing menstrual damage to tens of thousands of women, 15,000 women bleeding every day after being injected, 10,000 women having 2 periods a month, 7,500 women having no periods at all, meaning they're totally infertile, 10-year-old girls bleeding upon being injected, 85-year-old women bleeding upon being injected, women hemorrhaging, women passing clots, lives ruined, and certainly fertility ruined. All of it documented meticulously by Pfizer in the pregnancy and lactation report, which went to the White House and to Dr. Rochelle Walensky and the FDA. I'm quite sure if you investigate, you will find comparable charts that went to your leaders across Europe, because they were all on the same page. But I'm getting ahead of my story. Also in the pregnancy and lactation report is a chart showing that they experimented on babies, and they knew it, and they experimented on at least 3 babies to death, okay? This showed that babies who were nursing from vaccinated moms, these ones had vomiting, and these ones had edema, which is swollen tissues, and these ones had fever, and these ones had failure to thrive. They couldn't gain weight. These ones were inconsolable. I can never get that out of my head. One poor baby went into convulsions after nursing from a vaccinated mom, and then was rushed to the ER and died after multi-organ system failure. Her whole system shut down. What did they know? What is breast milk made of? I learned this in this process. It's made of out of the building blocks of lymph and blood. And so the lipid nanoparticles, the polyethylene glycol that are in the blood and lymph of vaccinated moms are turning into poisoned milk that is poisoning their babies. And Pfizer knew it. And to this day, the women of Europe don't know it. The women of America, for the most part, don't know it, unless they happen to have heard me or come up on this book. And so they're so at risk. And nursing, which is such an important part of human development and bonding and the immune system, has gone from 34% of all babies and moms to 14% of all babies and moms. And babies' first experience, I think we're going to see the damage of this in a generation, of human intimacy is poison, is poisoned nourishment now, and they don't have the words to say it to their moms or dads. But Pfizer knew. So this went to the White House, and 3 days later, on April 23rd, 2021, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, a mother, I should note, gave a White House press conference to the people of my nation, saying, with this in hand, There's no bad time to get your COVID mRNA injection before you get pregnant, during your pregnancy, or after your baby is born. She said that, knowing this. Lastly, in the pregnancy and lactation report, 2 babies died in utero, and Pfizer concluded that they died due to, quote, maternal exposure to the vaccine. So Pfizer knew that they were going to kill babies, that they were killing babies, and putting women at risk. And now let me fast forward, because I need to reach some of the conclusions of my talk. This is very predictable, what would happen. We're now 4 years after the rollout of this injection. And this book will show you this 360-degree attack on every aspect of human reproduction. Well, Igor Chudov, a mathematician and commentator, has analyzed government databases from about 20 different nations, including European nations. And vaccinated nations have lost 13 to 20% of their live births have dropped by that amount. And he calculates that in Europe, there are 1 million missing babies. We analyzed the government data from Canada, another terrible drop in live births. And now there was a big study from the Czech Republic, I believe, that also showed a dramatic drop in live births. And other studies are confirming what we began to publish in 2022, that vaccinated women are losing their eggs. They don't have the fertility of unvaccinated women. So this happened. This happened. And in spite of every effort to silence people who tried to bring this information to the public, to lawmakers, there was a comprehensive suppression of this information that could have saved so many lives. I was just in Iceland. They are not at replacement levels for their own population. They now have 1.5 live births for every couple of 2 Icelanders. Icelanders will be extinct over time, God forbid, unless this can be reversed, unless we can study and treat the infertility that Pfizer and their allies brought about. So to conclude, because I know we need to take questions, why I have concluded very reluctantly that we can't attribute these horrors to corporate greed, people moving too fast. If someone tries to tell you that, they're lying, right? If it was corporate greed, then month 1 or month 2 of seeing these deaths and side effects, Pfizer would have pulled, and your authorities would have pulled, Britain's authorities would have pulled, Canada's, Australia's, this technology. But they didn't. And by the way, lipid nanoparticles have been known to damage human fertility since 2017, and they chose to use them anyway. No, you can't conclude that this is an accident. You have to conclude, since year after year after year unfolded, knowing this damage, that Pfizer knew, your elected officials knew, your public health authorities knew. This is my speculation. I await an investigation. Our public health authorities knew, our elected officials knew, the FDA knew. There was collusion at the highest levels to make this happen. I'd love for it to be an accident or corporate greed, but it isn't. It is a mass murder. And again, I say this deeply knowingly, as a Jew, as the granddaughter of Rosa and Joseph Wolf, and all of their lost brothers and sisters. This is the greatest crime against humanity in recorded history, just numerically, because billions of people have been injected with this. So I will end by telling you why I believe it's a bioweapon, and that it was deployed, in effect, to reduce Western populations and influence. Number one piece of evidence is research I did that found that in 2021, there's an SEC filing, the Securities and Exchange Commission in my country, which is BioNTech, which is the subsidiary of Pfizer that produced this mRNA injection. And it is a memorandum of understanding, meaning an agreement, a legal agreement, that shows a partnership between BioNTech, which we're told is a German company, but it's not a German company, it's a German-Chinese company, because the partnership is with the Chinese Communist Party. The partnership is with Fosun Pharmaceuticals, which is one of the biggest pharma companies in China. And you all know that in any major company in China, there's a merger between the party and corporate governance. Well, Fosun Pharmaceuticals didn't create 1 billion doses of this injection for internal consumption. They use a different injection in China. They manufactured 1 billion doses for export to Western Europe and North America. And in the SEC filing, it specifies that the IP, intellectual property of the injection, is to be transferred. It doesn't say to a Chinese individual. It doesn't say to a Chinese company. It says to China. So since 2021, if you've taken a Pfizer COVID injection, you're taking an intervention that was formulated, manufactured, packaged, distributed by people who have stated that they want to be the world's hegemon by 2049, 100 years after the independence or the establishment of Chinese communist rule, and who have made war on the West in many other ways. And I don't think they're working alone. I think, you know, there's alliances at levels that we can discuss, but just from my knowledge that our enemies are making this injection. Also, the deployment, again, isn't random. There are 11 manufacturing plants in Western Europe, 14 now in North America. But the side effects are not random. And again, to me as a journalist rather than as a doctor, this is very important evidence. Of the almost 43,000 serious adverse events in the Pfizer papers, they're not randomly distributed around the world. They're localized in Western democracies. And not only that, but this really caught my attention as a political consultant and commentator. The greatest number of serious adverse events are in the countries with the most influence in Western democracies. So over 42,000 in the United States, and then after that, tranches of serious adverse events in European countries in descending order of political importance and population importance. So Germany, France, Britain, Italy, Spain, Greece, in that order. And then all the rest of the world, the other 52 countries of the world combined amount to about 7,000 adverse events. And what I want to tell you is that it's very easy to target the lethality or the damage of these injections by manipulating things as simple as brand. Moderna has 3 times the serious adverse, the serious damaging particles as Pfizer, but Pfizer has more DNA contamination, as it's been discovered, or by manipulating things as simple as temperature. You remember that it was supposed to be, this material was supposed to be kept very, very cold, and then you stopped hearing about that. The materials coalesce at room temperature and at warmer temperatures. So I can't pursue that, right? This is beyond what's in the Pfizer papers as a journalist. In spite of being called a conspiracy theorist worldwide, I do what I've always done, which is I stick to the facts. I don't go beyond what the evidence provides. But that evidence, to me, requires investigation. How do you take something that easily is manipulated to target populations, and you have these terrible losses and damage and infertility in Western nations? So I'll stop there. We can talk about what I think it means that other populations are not being mandated. But I will note, if I have a minute to conclude, that if you look with this analysis at who got mandated, certainly in my country, but I believe throughout Western Europe, but in my country, who got mandated? It was our soldiers, our sailors, our Air Force, our special operators, right? Our special ops fighters, our next generation, our college students, if they wanted to go back to school, the kids of the elites, interestingly, Ivy Leagues mandated. Who else got mandated? Our healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, right? Our first responders. The people who were mandated were the people that you need to keep a society functioning if it's under attack. And I do owe a great deal to my husband, who spent many years in the intelligence community and in the military, in military intelligence, by explaining to me that there are many ways to make war on a nation, and that not all of them involve bombs and land invasions, and some of them involve subverting or tenderizing the enemy through non-traditional means. So that's why I bring up the contamination of our pharmaceutical supply by one of our worst enemies. I will end there, except to say, on a more hopeful note, that this was a great evil. And in a way, you know, even though I try to stick to the facts, there's nothing I can conclude except that this is almost a metaphysical battle between good and evil, the like of which I've never seen in my lifetime, and that we're being asked to choose, you know, by history. Do you take the risk of silencing, rejection, controversy, and stand with truth and saving human lives and unborn babies? Or do you collude by silence, conformity with a great, great evil? And I will end by saying, you know, I stand by to help any of you in your efforts to legislate, to investigate, to shed light on this. Many other people do as well. But I also believe that, you know, humanity has been given a chance to face the worst abyss that could be created, and it has been given a chance with this knowledge and information to draw back from it, to learn treatment, to learn hope, to learn how to legislate so that this kind of tyranny and violence and mass murder can never take place again. So thank you all for your time.
Wow. Are you mad yet?
Yeah.
Are you mad yet?
Yes.
I mean, you know, this was actually even worse. I mean, I know a lot. I really do. I've been, you know, spending time with that. I've been advocating for, you know, against the restrictions of measurement. But that even blew my head, man. I would have never expected it to go that deep. And what you were telling about, you know, especially the attacks on the reproductive system, that reminded me actually in fall of 2023, the EU Commission came out with a preparedness plan for the COVID season of 22-23. And in it, they were pretty much coming up with plans because they wanted to raise the uptake of the mRNA injection. And they were speaking about hard-to-reach population groups. And they meant, for example, me with that, because I never took that crap. So I was a hard-to-reach group, and they wanted to specifically target the unvaccinated. And came up with all kinds of psychological whatever plans and games and putting more pressure, taking people out of health insurance and, you know, all of this. So, but what was really shocking, and because you were just speaking about that, they also came up with a priority for certain risk groups. And they identified these risk groups. And they were talking about elderly people. They were talking about people with comorbidities or underlying conditions. And, wait for it, another risk group were pregnant women. They specifically listed pregnant women as one of the risk groups that would get priority in taking the third or fourth or I don't know, 100th booster of the mRNA injection. And that is shocking just from having heard what you just said. So I would like to open the floor for questions. And please just raise your hand and I will call on you. Please, Mr. Kartheiser.
Yes, thank you very much, and I'm deeply impressed and very grateful also to Dr. Wolf to explain this to us. It's really amazing, and I commend her and all I wonder how things are going to proceed from here, because normally a company like Pfizer should now face criminal proceedings, or at least some proceedings for civil liability in all this. So is that the next step maybe, or have you already in the United States a start of judicial proceedings now as a follow-up to the work that you have done? And also I have another question on now the future of the mRNA technology in medicine. Because sometimes we read in publications that there are now new medications developed against all kinds of diseases, cancer, dementia, Parkinson, whatever, based on that technology. Now I wonder, is it now better controlled as it was in COVID? Are there controls at all? How are we now being confronted? What are we supposed to do with all these new drugs that come on the market based on that very same technology, and how can we trust then those drugs when we have seen what happened during the COVID period?
Right.
So thank you very much for your work.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and you're asking the most important questions. So let me take the first one. The first answer is yes. There are a number of lawsuits. We've launched one. A lawyer named George Smith has sued Pfizer as well as the Biden administration, and he's actually in discussion right now with the Department of Justice about, well, I won't get ahead of the lawyers, but that's promising. And there have been other lawsuits. But the trouble with the United States' current legal situation is that we have something called the PrEP Act, which was a Reagan-era law that was passed that basically exempts drug companies from any kind of litigation or liability. And it's like, you know, what if you couldn't sue car manufacturers and people were building cars with no brakes? I mean, that's the situation. So it's very, very difficult to get remedies, certainly within civil law. I think there are remedies, and so does George Smith, in criminal law, because, for instance, the coercion that people suffered is a form of fraud. It's a form of, you know, battery in some states, many forms of assault. Certainly lying to people is a form of fraud, and those harms are in our lawsuit. But there's been limited success with other lawsuits. Some recently, I think one other lawsuit just moved forward. Now, having said that, there are very positive laws and policies that are being addressed right now. For instance, we drafted a bill. My company, Daily Cloud, also makes legislation available. My dream is to make EU legislation available and socially shareable the way US legislation is available and socially shareable through our platform. But we drafted a bill to make it illegal to ask for vaccine passports or vaccines for to acquire any good or service. And that was passed in 33 states in 2023. So there are good model bills. There are a lot of good bills to prevent future public emergencies that suspend the rule of law, other really good state bills that have passed. For instance, New Hampshire passed one such bill. And again, I'll make these draft bills available to all of you, or the actual bills, if you want to look at the language. I know we have different systems, but there's good legislation that's out there. I know RFK Jr., the new HHS secretary, who is a historic figure in alignment with President Trump, has launched a critique of the fact that our country, as well as New Zealand, are the only two countries in the world where you can advertise directly to consumers for pharmaceutical products. And so that means our media is funded 70% by pharma, you know, CNN, NPR, and that's dangerous. So he's looking into ending that. But until we get rid of the PrEP Act, and there are many draft bills on BillCam, our platform, to end the PrEP Act, we can't really have very successful outcomes suing Pfizer or the FDA, although there's some progress. That said, you all are in a position to, I'm not an expert at all in European legislation, but there's so many good models of bills that could prevent coercion in the future, that could create a fund for vaccine-injured people that could compel real studies, gold standard studies, which we don't have right now, the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. We're only beginning to get those studies that could make it illegal ever to compel any kind of medical outcome for access to goods and services. I mean, free speech is under attack in Europe. In Britain, it's a crisis. Free speech, if people had free speech, if I hadn't been censored, if Dr. Bhattacharya hadn't been censored, if now Secretary Kennedy hadn't been censored, people would have been able to warn each other, right? So you can strengthen freedoms of speech in Europe. But the last thing I want to say is your laws exist in some fundamental way, and they were just violated because the Nuremberg Code does forbid any kind of experimentation on humans in Europe and around the world based on fraud or coercion of any kind. So the people who mandated anything in Europe already broke European law. I just want to put that out there. Now, to your second question, which was?
mRNA technology.
Oh, the other technologies. So I guess all I will say is the reason I never got vaccinated is that I have a tech company, and so I can read biotech industry excitement. And I saw when they first were talking about the mRNA platform in 2020 that the biotech journalism world was a lot more excited than the medical world, and that there was a lot more boosterism, enthusiasm in biotech journalism about this than there was any evidence that was safe. And so as a CEO of a tech company, I thought, well, that's a bubble. That's a tech bubble. That means that a bunch of tech VCs have gone in there, pumped millions or billions of dollars into this technology, and they want to have a big exit before everyone gets sick and it's obvious that it's a failure and it gets pulled off the market. And that's a methodology that's been done over and over. And so when you peel back who is invested in these vaccines, it is Silicon Valley. Mark Zuckerberg is invested in the vaccines. Bill Gates is invested in the vaccines. There was a COVID-19 project that was Microsoft, Gates, Amazon, all these big tech companies to basically lie to people all in one voice and suppress dissent all in one voice worldwide. So I guess what I'm trying to say is they don't want to give up on the mRNA platform because they've invested so much money in it. It's a failure, and I think that they're going to keep trying to recycle this technology and have you take it. The idea of one injection that can solve everything is just on its face nonsensical, but it's that same model of pumping it up, and getting out before it collapses. That's my analysis.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out that there is good legislation out there, but unfortunately we can't do anything with it because we're not a parliament, right? We don't even have the competency to initiate any laws. But what we can do, of course, is we can take it back to our member states, because there we have parliaments. They still have the right to initiate legislation. So we might talk about that later, and you might point me to some examples of that, and we'll get into that.
I will. Can I add to what you just said, though? Respectfully, I do agree, and I've written in my book, The Bodies of Others, I traced the disenfranchisement of Europeans through the EU, and I'm very worried about European democracy as a result. But you do have a lot of power in spite of that, and it's the power of the bully pulpit and of role modeling. And what I mean by that is so many people in Europe are afraid. They're afraid of even asking questions. And if they see their MEPs publicly bringing out this information, having these debates, having panels, asking questions, taking the information to their constituents, reaching out to the press, even if the press doesn't bite, doing podcasts, which everyone can do, I believe, I think it goes a really long way to showing people that there's courage in the European Parliament, and there are people pursuing truth in the European Parliament, and it does kind of help break the spell.
Yes, please.
So thank you for coming to Brussels and for all your work and determination to publish these papers. Especially as a journalist, it's important that you justified your profession in many ways. The media's role was appalling in all of this.
Thank you.
Also, what you've described here is very disturbing. On a positive note, I come from Croatia. There was immediate pushback among ordinary people compared to many Western countries. The vaccination rates were relatively low, especially for children. Our government ordered millions of doses that were unnecessary, so that's the good news. There was a lot of skepticism, and people followed their intuitions, and parents, I think today, it was shown that they were prudent in being so critical. So there were some redeeming moments in all of this. My question goes to what you said about China. I do agree that it's not just a competitor, but it's an enemy of the West. They use every situation clearly to undermine our countries. But when it comes to mRNA, they also had their own homegrown vaccination approved, the same technology. So is there any evidence of these effects in China among the population? I'm sure millions of them were also getting these injections in the country. The lockdowns that many European countries followed were shocking. People were starving to death in China. So it seems that they in many ways were not wiser than we were in combating this epidemic. So perhaps you could comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a great and important question. What I would say is that we don't have the data because science in China is not free. And that's something that, again, harms the rest of the world, to not have that data, to add to the world's data. And I'm sure if there are similar serious adverse events, hospitals are not releasing documentation. I don't know, but I'll look into the data that does exist, if I can find it, and get back to you via passing it on. It's very, very important. I guess what I would say about that, though, is that this intervention, country by country, has shown that the normal reasoning we've always had about what states want to do for their populations has been turned on its head, and we can no longer take that for granted. And we know that China, experiments on its people, and that it harvests organs, and that it forces people to either have babies or not have babies, forces women to have abortions. So I don't know that we can conclude until we see whatever data there are that China spared its own people.
Okay, Madame Protard.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Diane Protard. I'm a lawyer, so it's a lawyer question. You said that you have the PrEP Act in America. That is a shield of liability for the pharmaceutical companies. Well, we don't have that normally in Europe. We have liabilities for the products of the pharmaceutical company. But the contract was negotiated between the European Union and Pfizer over billions of dollars. And inside this contract, there was a special clause that we never had before, saying that this pharmaceutical company will not be liable for this special product. And maybe you heard that there were an article in the New York Times in 2021 saying that Ebola and Mrs. von der Leyen had extensive talk about the vaccine before the purchase. So with what you said in the Pfizer paper, what do you think was on this conversation to make Europe buy so much product, but also accept not be able for a citizen to criticize this product and to go after the liability of Pfizer?
The question, thank you. The question is first of all, thank you for your work in trying to get justice for this issue. The question is, what do I think are in those texts?
That's another question. What do you think about it?
Well,
the fact that Pfizer is not liable everywhere in the world.
Right.
Now, at the beginning, it was only in America.
Right.
And now it's everywhere.
Well, let me ask about that. Again, I'm not a lawyer, and let alone in this specialized area in European law, but how can a contract violate the Constitution or European human rights law? It can't, right?
This is a real no question, so you can have feeling with me and ask this question. This is exactly that. This is what we are saying to the MP. How come a contract, a commercial contract, supersize all our fundamental rights and Constitution? How can it be set aside without this word?
I mean, it can't, is my understanding of the law. I mean, I could, try to draw up a contract